Good morning and welcome to SCUSA-CAN's 16th annual forum. This is 16 years we've been doing this and everyone is very, very exciting and stimulating. This year, once again, we're virtual, but we're hoping next year we'll all be together in person. That would be great. The theme for this year's event is Beyond the Gap. It's a look at the so-called post-pandemic period with the underlying questions, where do we go from here? As seen through the prism of 7 different sessions. Our first session was this morning. This is our second session. We'll have 4 sessions tomorrow and 1 more this afternoon. So I hope those who are joining us will join us for those as well. This session is aptly entitled Beyond the Gap, the theme of our forum. And moderating today's conversation is Tom Ralston, the director of the Forum for Western Pennsylvania School Superintendents and an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Welcome, Tom, and thank you for leading this very important and timely conversation. And thank you to a remarkable panel to help provide insights to all of us in this very challenging time. Tom, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Welcome to everyone, our panelists, as well as everyone that's joining us online for this great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. We had a chance to interact with our guest panelists a bit prior to our event today. And, you know, one of the great things about having this group of folks is that we really, we've got a lot of diverse perspectives, right? So we have folks who are in school leadership and higher education, who are parents and have experienced the pandemic firsthand with their children, and also student perspective, which is always wonderful to have our end users. As Michael had said, currently my role is as an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and I also am the executive director of the Forum for Western Pennsylvania School Superintendents. Prior to that, I was a school superintendent in the Pittsburgh area for 9 years, and so had the opportunity to experience the pandemic firsthand. So as we get started with our talk today, I'd like to give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and talk a bit about what they're currently doing. Quintin, let's start with you.
Thank you, Tom, and good afternoon to everyone. Quintin Bullock, president for the Community College of Allegheny County. The Community College of Allegheny County is located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We serve approximately 40,000 credit, non-credit students in 150 academic and career programs.
Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. My name is Michelle Navarre. I am the founder and head of school of Polaris Charter Academy. We're a kindergarten through 8th grade charter school in the west side of Chicago. And we are the only EL education school in the city of Chicago. We're a credentialed and mentor school here in the city.
Thank you, Michelle. Tamara.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am the proud principal here at Penn Hills Charter School of Entrepreneurship, the only entrepreneurial school in Pennsylvania. I am also recently named the superintendent of Clairton City School District. Here at Penn Hills Charter, we do serve 420 students, K-8.
Thank you, Tamara. Oluwasola.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Oluwasola Ogundare, a current high school senior at Science Park High School in Newark, New Jersey. I'm a part of the National Honor Society, the Newark Board of Education for math teachers, and I also participate in track and field in the winter and the spring.
It sounds like you are very busy, and we certainly appreciate you making time to join us.
Thank you.
And finally, our last panelist is Dominic Lee.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominic Lee. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of the Building Responsible, Intelligent, Creative Kids organization. We are an organization that views our schools as a convening institution to support children and families in a cradle to career pipeline, ensuring that we provide a quality education, but at the same time, working on the social determinants of health around health, housing, and family support and workforce development.
Thank you. So as Michael said, the theme for today's, actually for the forum itself, is Beyond the Gap. And that's the specific theme for our discussion today. The pandemic certainly exposed many gaps and accentuated gaps that were there that maybe folks weren't quite talking about a whole lot, right? But we are now. And so, I've started thinking about this a bit and really, kind of categorize some of these gaps, resource gaps, service gaps, learning gaps, obviously. One of the ones that jumped out to me, since we have so many school leaders on the call today, is, innovative thinking gaps, right? Like we saw a lot of school leaders that were somewhat paralyzed by the pandemic and struggling with how to respond to meet the children's needs that they serve. And then I think there really, I think it's also accentuated this idea of our models of education. Are they really truly doing what we need them to do to prepare children for the present and the future? So with those things in mind, I'd like to start our conversation. And Dominique, I know we just finished off with you, but would you mind, maybe offering a perspective to one of those areas, or maybe there's something that you've thought of that I haven't in those gap areas?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think we know this before the pandemic, but what has highlighted definitely during the pandemic, the gap that I noticed was the issues around just the stability of families and how the social fabric or the social network that many of our families that we currently serve, that was kind of disappearing before, and it just was basically non-existent during the pandemic. So the issues around affordability of housing, if I'm only making $35,000 or $40,000 and the average 2-bedroom in my community is $1,800, that's unaffordable for me. To the point of food access, it takes me 30 minutes just to get to a grocery store when there's not one in my community. I'm in the middle of a pandemic. I can't get on the bus and all this stuff, and because I don't want to risk getting COVID. So there's a food desert situation. So access to food. In our community, we do have a wonderful hospital, but a hospital we wanted to increase health access because, you don't want to go to the hospital for routine health. So there was no non-existent routine health facility in our community. So those are the things that really kind of just exacerbate themselves during the pandemic, in which we as an organization pushed ourselves to continue to support children around those. But I do agree that there's other gaps. And I know some people, my peers on this panel will kind of talk about those other gaps that us educators saw.
Oh, thank you so much, Dominique. And I recognized, I think, how many communities really saw their schools prior to the pandemic, but even more so during the pandemic, as the hub and a resource, especially for food, right? I think many of our schools really stood tall to ensure that families had access to food and lots and lots of challenging situations. So thank you for sharing that. Tamara, are there things that you thought of that were unique to your situation?
Yes, and I can also build on Dominique's about the resource. I go immediately to the food because we are the hub for many families. We serve about 11 school districts. So our gap is even wider because now we're crossing different districts as well. And so what was probably the immediate was technology, being able to have access to not only the technology itself, but the Wi-Fi, the connection. You might have a technology device, but also being able to have the Wi-Fi internet as well. Another big gap that existed was parent availability and being able to support your child during this pandemic. Because we all had to be creative in looking at remote instruction, it required some parent involvement, which now exposed the lack thereof of parent involvement. So now we're depending on our school systems that we transfer information with our parents through our network of Skyward. And now, if you didn't have parents who didn't have the right information, didn't have the right email, being able to connect families to the resources, that really exacerbated the need for our relationship to be stronger and getting people what they needed. So those are a couple of the things. I know I want to give everyone else a chance because we can definitely talk about the academic piece that showed up very boldly. And, we could have these conversations with parents about your child is really struggling and we can't reach the parent. Now the parents get to see the struggle and experience the struggle that our teachers for so long have been trying to communicate.
Boy, it certainly did raise a veil for those things and brought them to the surface, didn't it?
Yes.
Michelle, how about you in your situation? Do you have things to add to the conversation with respect to these gaps that came to the surface?
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting if you think about, I think what we're all hitting on is kind of like those Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And those basic needs being met. And so at Polaris, it was no different from what I hear our other panelists speaking about. So first and foremost, we had to make sure that our families had access to food, right? That was our first priority. And at Polaris, we were very fortunate enough to be able to deliver breakfast and lunches to our families on a weekly basis so that they did not have to take 2 buses to get to school to pick up food for the week. And so making sure we had that. And then the next being the technology piece, that if we're going to commit to engaging with our families online, that they not only have a Chromebook or a laptop or whatever it is they need, but that if you don't have access to the internet, that you get a hotspot that goes along with it, that is working. And so that was something that I think coming out of the pandemic is incredibly helpful for us, as we are now 2-to-1 tech-wise in our community. So kids can keep a laptop at home all the time, and then they have one at school so they don't have to travel with it. But I would say for Polaris, and I'm going to guess that I'm going to get some of this, meaning I agree. What was widened by this it was always apparent at Polaris, but was widened is the social emotional supports for our young people and our families. And so we are now in a community that if and when students experience trauma or are going through a crisis and they need that support, we have 2 social workers on staff, but sometimes that's not enough and you need more additional support. Pre-pandemic, there was a 6 to 9 month waiting list for young people to get the counseling or therapy or supports that they need. Coming out of that pandemic, that gap has ranged now from 12 to 18 months because so many young people are facing very serious bouts of depression, anxiety, and the impact of multiple traumas. I would say that it was not just a trauma that happened, there were multiple traumas happening to children, not just at Polaris, but around the world. And I think that is our biggest need and opportunity at this point.
Oh, thank you so much for adding that piece. That is so important. And we're very fortunate to have a student joining us today to possibly add some thoughts to that conversation with regard to student mental health. What do you have to add there, Oluwasola?
Yeah, I feel like prioritizing student health is a very important aspect that often gets overlooked in school. I know pre-pandemic, there was a lot of resources at my school that were coming about to help students along their journey through high school, making sure that we prioritize our own needs and our own health, even realizing that although our grades did come first and were a very important aspect of our lives at the time, they weren't the most important thing. Because even while attempting to get into a good school and get good grades, it was important that we ourselves were healthy along the journey, whether that was emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically. We made sure that it was important to prioritize our health. And I know post-pandemic, a lot of kids who were stuck behind the screen, they lost a lot of those resources that were able to basically give them the maturity and the experience to know how to prioritize their own health while still making sure that their academics in the classroom were at the level that they needed to be. And I know coming back, it's hard for a lot of kids to make that adjustment, because coming from a year online with low social interactions, not being able to gain experience needed for that next level, you have a lot of kids coming back from maybe even 8th graders turning into freshmen or even sophomores. And now the workload has increased. There's a lot more things that they have to keep an eye out for, because, senior year is approaching, college is approaching, but now there's not enough resources for these kids to be able to still make sure that their grades are on point, but still be able to have enough personal care and take the times out of their day to make sure that they're healthy.
Boy, that's so true. I have a 15-year-old at home, and so I had a chance to see how he navigated through the pandemic. But I also know that to one of our previous points, one of the most important hires that many school districts entered into, whether it was using funding from the government or their own funding was the school social worker, and what a great aid that was to ensuring that services and resources were provided to our families and our students. Quintin, I'm sure you have a unique perspective from the higher education angle. What do you have to add to our conversation?
First, I would just like to extend my kudos to Oluwasola. Did an exceptional job in defining the experiences of students. Within the higher education arena, of course, we face several unexpected challenges that arose. The first was the complete transformation from the traditional in-person instruction to a fully deliverable online instruction, allowing our faculty the time to be able to engage in that transition, and then also assuming that all students would have the necessary equipment and technology to accommodate the instruction. And we were quick to realize that although the transition was smooth, many students did not have the laptops or the hotspots or the interest to want to engage in the online experience because they prefer the in-person component. So that then put us in a position to see, well, how can we better accommodate students? And we did several initiatives. Number one, we purchased laptops to give the students who did have the aptitude and the skills and the knowledge to support them. We provided hotspots to support them in having the access from their home. We also realized that students that were impacted within our community were the employee that were most impacted with the layoffs, meaning that resources initially were minimum. So we put in place an emergency fund for students to request emergency dollars for unexpected expenses, food, utility costs, etc. We also realized that students would still need access to supportive services. So we transitioned all of our support services to a virtual format to allow a student to be able to access those services, which would include access to tutoring, access to an advisor or counselor, any of the essential tools that students would generally use in a face-to-face environment to ensure they had the necessary support to successfully complete their studies during the semester and earn the grade that they had worked so hard to achieve.
Boy, that's very powerful. Lots and lots of work. And I'll just add on to one of those points. What we saw our teachers do during the pandemic and the amount of professional learning to be able to shift their instruction from an in-person model to be able to teach effectively online was really remarkable. I know in our district, what we started with in the early stage of the pandemic and what we ended up with in the latter stages looked very, very different. But I have to hand it to our teachers. Boy, they really stepped up, and even though they weren't maybe as comfortable as they would have liked, I can't think of another time in history where our teachers have shifted their practice so dramatically. So, well, as we turn our conversation, obviously we've spent a lot of time talking about some of the challenges. Now let's talk about, where do we go from here? So in my mind, we can kind of center this conversation in three different areas in order to maybe think about the future and the present. And that would be thinking about, what do we need to stop doing that we've been doing in school for a long time that's really no longer relevant and that's been really exposed to the pandemic? What do we need to start doing? Maybe there were things that we started doing during the pandemic as a response to support students and families. But now coming out of it, I think a lot of folks, that fatigue factor and the comfort, a lot of people just want to return to the way it was. But we know from our experience that maybe it's not the most effective thing. But maybe there are some things that we want to continue and get back to doing. So we'll maybe structure our responses in those three. So what do we need to stop doing in schools? What do we need to start doing? And then what are some things that we know are still really, really good practices that we've always done to support students and families? Tamara, would you want to get us started?
Absolutely. I was taking some notes and also living the experience truthfully. So I'm going to just start with the first thing that came to my mind was stop making excuses. This has allowed us to not have excuses. We are in a time where we can model the expectation The way we want children to be adults is now for us to demonstrate what that looks like. So through this, we need to start finding the solutions. My little motto since I've been at this school is no excuses, only solutions. So now this was the time to live out not just what I say, but what we need to do. And so we can start not putting people in boxes, starting with our staff, starting with our students and our families. Everyone is not the same, so we need to stop treating everyone the same. And I feel like that is how education, I keep saying, this is the only field that we keep doing the same things to everyone, teaching to the middle. This we have to stop doing. And I think when we talk about how we come out of this is by doing just that. You know, when we hear individualized instruction, this is now something we started doing. So I'm gonna transition to what we need to start doing is to really look at students as individuals, look at our staff as individuals. I didn't mention this, but our staff was also traumatized through this process. So we were focused on students, but we also had to make every effort to make sure the mental health of our staff was in the right place. If you don't have a well staff, you can't have well students. And so we needed to make sure that our staff was well. And that's something that we need to continue to do, is to make sure we do checks. We've implemented a process with our HR department. She does checks quarterly, new staff, old staff, just to see how well they're doing. That's something we didn't do prior to pandemic. You know, that was just, we took it for granted. We come to work, we do our jobs. After the pandemic and through the pandemic, we started in the pandemic and we're continuing that same process. And it has been invaluable because we really don't know the mental health and challenges that our families, our students, and our staff are faced with. The other thing that we need to start doing and continue to do is the connections with our families. Through this remote learning, we had to have these communications. Parents were now calling us. I can't get connected. Where's the assignment? So parents we may not have heard from are now reaching out. We have to continue, stay connected with our families. They are our biggest ally. They are our biggest support. And if we're going to close a gap, it only goes with working with our parents. There are partners in this, and we need to work together to continue to move forward if we're going to close gaps.
Well, thank you so much. Boy, there were lots and lots of great nuggets of value in there. And I'll just accentuate the last one, which is this idea of reimagining how we interact with parents and move from a model of what some might describe as parent involvement to one of true parent engagement, where we're engaging our parents as trusting partners who have a voice in their child's education. The other thing that resonated with me that you said is this idea of personalizing education, and Quintin touched on this as well. Students that identified their preference for learning, and I know I had many teachers who said to me, "Boy, I really struggled to engage, this particular student when we were in person format, but I am amazed by what how engaged they are now that we're in a remote format. That seems to really be their preference as a learning model." And so we uncovered a lot through the whole experience, and I loved your thoughts about all those three areas. Dominique, what do you have to add? I definitely could tell that some of those things that Tamara were mentioning, they were resonating with you.
Yeah, so my stop, continue, and innovate, it's all kind of wrapped in the same one, which is we have to stop, and I'm taking this as a collective of all of our public systems. We have to stop operating in silos. And you started to see this work during the pandemic, where we're trying to track down kids, who's doing this, who's doing that. Us as public systems, as education, as Michelle mentioned, our health, such as our housing, all of us together are trying to serve people. And it just baffles me that we refuse to kind of work together. And so we have to stop working in these silos. We have to continue to push on that. I would say that's where the innovation lies, is where you are working with a family, and that family is looked at as a unit and not bifurcated because the different systems that touch that. But we are in a communication from education, from a education lens to a health lens to all the other parts that touch that unit of that family, that nucleus, and work with them, as Tom and Tamara have mentioned, as partners in a journey to achieve the dreams that they're set for themselves, as for the children, for the family as a whole, and be a support element to that. So I think that's where I would say stop working in silos, continue to push on how do we partner, and let's innovate where we all are working towards the same mission together.
Thanks so much. Great pieces in there as well. Michelle, how about you?
Yeah, make me have to go after those two, really? My stop is something that would be pre-pandemic, but I think the opportunity is really ripe right now. And that is, we have to stop as educators, as adults, talking out of both sides of our mouths. We have to stop saying that test scores shouldn't define our kids and then measure achievement solely through test scores. We have to stop doing that to our children. And so that is my big achievement should not equal a test score. What I think we have to start doing, and I appreciate Dominic's push of like, we have to stop operating in silos and we have to think about our children as unique individuals. But I think we also have to start thinking about our communities as unique ecosystems, and that schools have to adapt to become much more community responsive. We really have to be partnering and engaging with our families and our community members in ways to understand how to better serve our students. And then I think that at Polaris, it would be a continue for some other people, depending on where you are in your educational journey or what your school's focusing on. The continue for me is to really continue to deep dive and dig into what I would call making sure that we are focused on wellness. That means the physical wellness of our students, our families, our community, the academic wellness of our students, our families, and our community, and the social emotional wellness of our students, because that's what our community needs and that's what our kids need. And so really continuing to say that our final product is not, the scores our kids get. Our final product is the human beings we are graduating from Polaris, that they are academically sound, that they have strong character, and that they know themselves deeply, both as humans and learners.
I think that you measured up to Tamara and Dominique, so great job. You stated that very, very well. Oluwasola, you as your perspective as a student, are there things that you think that we need to change about education and do differently? Was there a particular format that you found and experienced during your education that you found really valuable, that you saw maybe classmates that either learned the same way that you did, or maybe they preferred a different type of model? What do you think?
Yeah, during online school, I think it really exposed how everybody has a different learning style that is best suited for them. And you can't force one learning style onto all students. I feel like that's a major problem that currently goes on with our school system. We kind of define kids as a whole instead of as individuals, believing that if this same approach has worked for others, it should work for them as well. So we just continue to push those same methods onto those kids, even though it may not work. And I feel like what we need to stop doing is stop wasting opportunities to grow and living in the past, because as we saw for the past 18 months, nothing's guaranteed. Things can change abruptly in a moment, and that forces us to change. But with this change, it opens up the door for new ways to learn, new ways to grow, and new ways to benefit students as a whole. And I believe what we should start doing is giving the future back into the kids' hands, making sure that they know of all the opportunities and chances that await for them in the future to make the most out of everything that they have. Because even when we present the chances to kids, I know that a lot of times, even my peers, the magnitude of it isn't defined how it should be. Even laying out these chances doesn't necessarily mean that these kids or these students are going to be able to pick up on them. And I feel like it's important that we start identifying the magnitude of these opportunities and making sure that all the children understand how significant these opportunities can be for them. Because at the end of the day, I feel like what we need to continue doing is pushing confidence into all of our students and all of our peers. Because even when these opportunities are presented to us, if we don't believe that we can make a change or believe that we can progress past the limits or the labels that have been put onto us, it doesn't matter. And I feel like we need to continue pushing confidence into these students and into these young adults that are growing up to make sure that they know that they can achieve everything that they want to do and that success is available for them and that they can always succeed as long as they continue to be determined and stay focused.
So it's about mindsets and dispositions that we should be focusing on. And I can hire you right now. I think. I don't think we can catch you at the right time. And I think all of our panelists would love to bring you on board. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, Quintin. I know our community colleges they're such a valuable resource all across our country. And something Michelle said that really resonated with me, and it's certainly something I believe strongly in as well, is we don't measure students by a test score. And one of the interesting things I've watched in the higher ed environment is that many colleges, universities have now, even coming out of the pandemic, are saying, you know what, we're not going to go back to SAT and ACT scores to admit students. What are your thoughts on that? And obviously, community colleges have done a great job of educating students without necessarily defining them by a test score.
No, that's a very important point. And we have been in discussion even pre-pandemic to look at ways for admissions. Of course, the community college has an open door admissions. We do use our test scores for placement in the appropriate college course, and students must demonstrate a level of competency to go into the general education courses, English, math, and sciences, and having a solid foundation to be successful in that component. We do use a combination of elements. Multiple measures is one of the more recent ones where they look at multiple factors that come in. It's a student in an AP class, that they earn a grade of A in the English class, that they take the SAT, that they engage in ongoing extracurricular coursework, and how was the outcome. In addition to that, they provide opportunities for students to also take a combination of classes if they feel that their aptitude is not at the level. We've combined courses with developmental and English composition as an example that allows them to address the areas in which they are not as strong, but at the same time learn the new competencies in the English composition, which gives them a sense of achievement and also provides them the reinforced learning abilities to be able to master the developmental component as well as earn a competitive and passing grade in the college level work. In addition to the testing, of course, you do want students to be successful. I do believe it's important to properly place students where they will be most successful, and having that solid benchmark as to where they are going into a class will yield the greater outcome that we want each student to be able to achieve.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I know our colleges, universities now I'm working at one now, so I'm seeing the adjustment, right? And the conversations, obviously, of higher ed certainly is not the only route for students to follow. They have multiple routes of success, and they should, again, connect to their passion and their purpose and identifying that. Well, if there's one specific practice that you could refer to that you would say, boy, I really learned a lot from this experience. And this is something that we did that was very successful, that we're going to continue doing in the future. I always think about learning the lessons from others, right? Like, what types of, I can eliminate a lot of work on my part if I can learn something from someone else who can tell me as they went on that journey, don't do this, but make sure you do this, right? So what would one thing be that you would say, boy, we really nailed it. We did such a great job with this one specific thing. And we're going to continue doing this in the future because we know it's really good for our students and our families. Quintin, do you want to start us off on that?
Absolutely. One of the
Oh, I think
initiatives
you're still
that,
muted.
am I still muted?
There you go. You're good now.
One of the initial thoughts that came to mind was embedded academic support services. It's where you embed a faculty member. We use a faculty member into our English composition class, and this faculty member serves as a support tutor for students following the class. As a result of that, the results of completing the class went up significantly, almost a 90% pass rate. It also provided a single point of contact for the student to access additional tutoring in the discipline in which they are taught. It also provided reinforced learning specific to what was just recently taught in the class. And as a result, we continue to offer this practice because it's a proven retention initiative that yields great student success.
And that sounds like a great practice and something that you're planning on continuing in the future.
Yes, we are. We've
Oh,
added resources to support it.
fantastic. That's great. Tamara, I know you're going to be moving to a new post here very soon. Congratulations on your appointment as the superintendent of Clairton. But are there certain things that you're going to take from Penn Hills Charter to your new position at Clairton?
Well, two things I kind of wrote down, and that was something that's not necessarily at Clairton, but something I would love to definitely share with my new family there is we had to pivot because of being a charter school. Our innovation is entrepreneurship. So one of the things that we learned through this is we don't stop our innovation because everything else in the world stopped. We, again, are the models for our students of how to reinvent yourself. And so through that, our program that we have, which is called Micro Society, where our students buy, sell, they create businesses. And so we couldn't just stop. I mean, what would we be saying to our children that, hey, in our society, when the pandemic hits, everything shuts down? We said, no, we put it in the hands of our students, just as you said. And so with that being said, we created an online shopping now. So it allowed them to continue to sell, continue to help them work together. Now we looked at classrooms, not just this intermingling. We made sure that we did it safely. We talked about the importance of safety in doing so. But again, the message was, we don't stop because the world stops. We figure out creative and innovative ways to continue to do what we need to do.
Well, that's fantastic. And I know you bring those ideas to Clairton. The students at Clairton will definitely benefit from them as well. Michelle, your thoughts on educating the whole child were really, really important. And we actually had someone in the chat who wanted to know more about that and thinking about how do we embed this idea of supporting the whole child when we think about measuring success and using competencies and things that we want to accentuate to see our children maximize their potential. Have you thought about that at all, or something maybe you've put in practice at your school?
Yeah, Polaris, we use a portfolio-based system for grading students, and we are on a 4-3-2-1 scale. So we do use a standards-based grading system for looking at academic instruction, making sure that we are hitting all of our standards. But that is all translated into portfolios that then lead to student-led conferences. So students are really leading all of their learning and gathering evidence. So they goal set at the beginning of the year, but they don't just academic goal set, they goal set around character development as well. And so we have something that we call the 5 points of Polaris. It's how we live our lives: integrity, compassion, being an explorer, critical thinker, and active citizen. Everyone in our building sets goals around those points. We constantly monitor and provide one another feedback. With that, I think that any sort of competency-based or any move away from a standardized testing system, I think that a key ingredient that I see missing from a lot of schools that I visit is really building in optimal opportunities for students to do reflection. And so we focus a lot around Camille Farrington's work out of the University of Chicago around the 5 types of reflection that students not just should have, but actually need to be impactful and effective learners, and have used those as models to redo all of our reflection tools. And so at Polaris, students reflect on a weekly basis on both their character and their academics. And we are now thinking about how do we build upon that, more of the social emotional, and knowing myself well enough to know we do a lot of trauma-informed practices in our school, but how are we going to take that to the next level and the next step to better support not just our kids, but all of our families? But I think portfolios are done well. I don't like portfolios that are like a dumping ground of like every piece of work. So they really have to be well curated, and it have to be, we start with kindergartners. That is all in their hands. They are guided through, but they understand that process as they grow.
Oh, that's really wonderful. And, you know, I noted that you just noted the sometimes the difficulty when in a system of passing those portfolios on. Is that something that you've come up with a system internally to do that well?
Yeah, so we have an entire system. So a portfolio, if you start as a kindergartner, as my oldest daughter did, who just graduated, I also have a 14-year-old at home who went through a pandemic 8th grade year. You know, I also have a 5th grader right here at Polaris still, but so I experienced the challenges of my school through that lens as well. And there were a lot of challenges. But if you are a kindergartner, you're when you graduate from 8th grade and you do your final, what we call passage, which is called final word, which is where you get to stand up in front of your family's friends, peers, and basically give a mini TED talk about yourself and how you have grown. You are using 9 years worth of evidence on your growth in your journey. And then you are using that to decide what are your goals for your freshman year? What are your goals next? We also use those portfolios to help students make informed high school decisions, because in the city of Chicago, applying to high schools are like applying to college. Like, it is a very rigorous process. And so we want our kids to know who you are as a learner. And so what is it that you need out of a high school setting? You know, if you need really small class sizes and you need individualized instruction where people know you well, then you're probably not going to go to Lane Tech, where there are thousands upon thousands of children. And so just really making sure that we are using everything that kids are learning about themselves in a myriad of ways so they see the value of it. It's not that it sits on a shelf and then comes out 3 times a year. It is like we are actively engaging with those on a regular basis. And it took a lot of I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years at Polaris. It took a lot of trial and error. We had a lot of dumping grounds and iterations of that.
I love your student-led conference, concept, and we use those in my district as well. And boy, what a great way to accentuate communication skills and students' reflection. Really important pieces. Oluwasola, have you used any systems such as that in your education? Things that really jump out to you that would benefit you and your classmates thinking about the future?
Yeah, I feel like, as Michelle said, one really important thing that me and my peers have used that have really helped us was yearly reflection, and not just overall yearly reflection as to how the year went, but also weekly, quarterly, and per lesson for whatever topic or class we are currently in. Because I feel like it's not only good for us to reflect on how we learned best and what areas that we needed to focus on or were lacking in, but it's also good for the teachers to see how their students basically adapted to the specific ways that they were teaching, or some of the flaws or strengths of a specific way of teaching / learning. And I feel like these reflections not only allow for the growth of the student to see how they can become a better student, improve their character, and also be able to excel in different classes, in different topics, and different units, but it also gives the teacher the ability to also help the students grow and be able to learn how each individual student basically viewed their teaching style and their perspective on what needs to improve and what needs to stay, the strengths and both the weaknesses.
That sounds like a fantastic culture that's been built in your school, where everyone considers themselves a rich part of that tapestry of the learning community, which is really, I'm sure, benefiting everyone there, the teachers, the students, the families. Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing. Dominique, what about you? Thoughts that you'd like to share about maybe a strategy or an idea or something, that a concept that you put in place that really worked well, and you're going to continue?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we learned was we had a Salesforce system prior to COVID, but during COVID, we had to utilize it a lot more because we were a hotbed in terms of COVID cases. So really everything was locked down. Like you couldn't even drive where our schools were. So we reconfigured our Salesforce system that allowed for us to communicate with some of our partners. And when I say partners, individuals who might be supporting our families just around stabilization, rental assistance, all that good stuff, and in which we can exchange case notes and really kind of see what was happening, because we couldn't just meet in person, or you couldn't just jump on Zoom every single minute. Normally what we do with our partners. So that system, we expanded, and it worked so well that we are going to be investing even more into it, because it has allowed for us to have a complete picture of what's going on, from the vice principal of culture on our buildings, understanding what might be happening, something at the house and vice versa for my health provider. So that is one thing that we nailed, I will say, and we're going to continue to put energy and effort behind it, because we do think it's revolutionary in terms of being able to kind of have a complete picture of the children in our building and the families that we're serving. And that also allowed us to really, going into this year, work on chronic absenteeism. Chronic absenteeism is a nationwide problem. And for us, it was a problem. We were hovering around 36% chronic absent. And so this year we're hovering, because of the tracking, in addition to some additional supports we put in the school, we're hovering around 12%. So a dramatic decrease, especially during the year of COVID, where everyone is getting sick left and right. So those would be, I say, the investment in the system, and also the initiatives we put around our chronic absenteeism effort.
Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, we certainly have, the pandemic is not over. As much as we are very, very satisfied with some of the vaccination efforts in communities, and the fact that we've gotten back to some in-person learning, and we've certainly found through the rising cases in the last few weeks that we're not out of the pandemic. I recently held an event and learned that lesson the hard way. So we are closing in our time here. So I would just like to maybe do a quick roundtable for those that would like to share one last thought with our audience. We've had some great conversations, and I would encourage you to continue them. We have some folks that are joining us online and have offered some thoughts about how important they can see student agency being a part of what we do in schools. So a final thought that you'd like to share, maybe there's an obstacle that you haven't quite figured out yet, that you are looking for help and assistance and ideas from others. Dominique, why don't you start us off with that?
Yeah, I think the category that we are still trying to push ourselves on, and I think our data is not moving in the direction that we wanted, is when you are supporting children who unfortunately have been left on the margins of our society. I would say about 80% of our kids move where we want them to go. We actually have the second highest student growth percentile in our state out of all 1,700 schools. So we can move kids, but there is a stubborn population in our building, and that it's not moving where we want them. They do move, but it's just not in the pace that we would like. So we are continuing trying to figure out how to support when there's just so much more that might be going on in a child's life outside the academic program. So we're always looking for, creative, innovative, sustainable solutions to support children who have been left on our margins of our society. That the kids that we all love, that take up all your time, they're always in your office, and you love them more than most of the other kids in the building, but you're still like, I need to move your academics. So I think that's where we're trying to push ourselves, is that bottom 10 that last 20% of our continuum in our buildings.
Oh, that's really so important. And, the trauma that some of those students and families face. And we had someone mentioned earlier that idea of Maslow's Maslow's hierarchy of needs is such a really important aspect to think of. I ran into a student recently on campus who was one of those students actually, and it was such a joy to see him and for him to say to me, boy, you know what, it took me a while, but I have my life moving in the right direction right now. I'm really proud of the work I'm doing. So, but we see, again, on the road, boy, if there's a way we can make that road a lot more smooth for those students, they shouldn't have to, undergo all those obstacles that they find so trying. Michelle, how about you? What are you trying to figure out? What's still maybe a challenge for you?
Like a million things to figure. I have a whole list like that. Do we have another hour? Because I could go on and on. I think that what I am trying to figure out right now, and I'm going to start this by saying, if anybody in this attendees are teachers right now, thank you. I know that it has become a trigger in this building for people to say, you guys need to innovate, because that's what you've been doing for 2 years straight. And we see you and we acknowledge that and we appreciate you, and keep going. It's going to be okay. Okay. We are not the people who we were in March of 2020, but we are stronger and we are better. I think where I continue to struggle is just a leadership thing. I tend to really hold the work like really high and really hard. And what I'm struggling with is the balance of holding my staff in a time that they need to be held a little bit, while holding the work. I can see the urgency, right? And they are just trying to make it up the next. I'm at the top of the staircase looking down going, we have a lot of work to do. And they're just trying to make it to the next step. And so I have a very natural tendency to be pushing. And so I've got a great leadership team that are like, whoa, hold your staff a little bit. And then, so I think that's a natural balance. So I'm also going to say to educators out there, if you feel being pushed, your leader believes in you, they need you, they're just also struggling right now. And so I think that finding some balance, right? We've almost tipped the scales in like the other way with teachers who are just really grappling. So how do I push that back up a little bit so we can move?
Boy, that's such an important point. I was talking to a school leader and he was telling me the very same thing you're mentioning. And he said, my second level leaders were talking about, we can't do one more thing. We're so overwhelmed. And he said, well, like, let's talk about some of those things you're overwhelmed with so I can help you. And they couldn't identify them. It was just that they can't take one more thing. There's the fatigue and the trauma has really kind of sucked the life out of them. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, I think it is. And I'm sorry to jump back in. I really believe that part of this is the fact that you had a year and a half away. And so all of the things that my teachers did with automaticity, right, that were just not even thought about every day, that was gone. Your like teacher muscle was gone because you had flexed different, you had built new muscles. And so when you got back in the building, it was like an entire building of first year teachers, but worse because they knew they weren't doing good enough, right? A lot of first year teachers just don't know yet. But that's what it felt like here. And so then they're just beating themselves up and then they're struggling because they're humans. So
I can say I'm in touch with that very much because I spent the first year teaching at the university and had to experience all those new systems. So I connect with that 100%. Oluwasola, what about you? Is there something that you're still struggling with that you want to really particularly work on?
Yeah, something that I'm currently working on is removing a lot of mental barriers that may keep me from reaching the levels that I want to achieve. And I know that a lot of my peers, we've also struggled with this, with the hard times that we've been through, is that we often allow social limits or labels that are put on us unfairly by others to kind of contain us in a way that don't necessarily allow us to think of ourselves in a higher level that we may have never thought of in the past. I know not only just in sports, but just going through life as well, I try to remove those mental barriers, and not just through meditation or visualization or materialization, but making sure that I understand that not necessarily just to be caught in dreams, but to reach for all my goals and truly believe that I can achieve them. Because I feel like a large aspect in all of our lives is the mental aspect of things, because you always get to a level where everybody else can do what you can do. Everybody else may have talent or may have been lucky enough to reach a specific level, but I feel like what separates us and really allows us to reach that next level of success is our mentality and how we approach things mentally. Because no matter what preparation you have put into things, or no matter how many things you may have set up to be able to succeed in one way, I feel like if you're not mentally ready to believe in yourself, you're never going to be able to achieve the things that you want to achieve. So I feel like definitely one thing that we should all work on is making sure that we're mentally prepared and we all mentally are assured of ourselves, knowing that we can reach the goals that we want to reach and we can achieve the things that we want to achieve.
Well said. And you are a very impressive young man and very mature in your thinking. So I have no doubt that any obstacle that you encounter, you're going to be successful overcoming. So thank you for joining us. We all really benefited from your insights today. Tamara, how about you? Is there something still that you're kind of stumped on that you want to continue to work on?
Yes, stamina from the staff, students, parents, being able to continue to push. We know we still, because guess what? We still, as much as we talk about our assessments, they still exist. As much as we want to see change, it hasn't changed and it may not change. And so we have to be the change we want to see. So what is it that we're doing that we need to do to increase that stamina? The socialization has been, I don't know, I look at second graders who are really trying to actually learn how to socialize, because I had to tell my staff, grace over grades. We need grace for ourselves, grace for our students. There's some students who haven't been here in school. They were kindergartners and they haven't been socialized. So we have to give ourselves grace. I have very hard, everyone who goes into education, I strongly believe you want to make a difference. And when you feel like you're not making that difference because you thought you were teaching second grade, you're really teaching kindergarten. And being able to have those cross content areas, as well as grade level conversations to say, it's okay. I just hug them and say, it's okay. We're going to get through this. Grace over grades. I created an acronym that I have to somehow coin, but I said we have to be a safe place. S stands for we have to stop. A means we have to ask what the need is. F, find what the problem is. And E was to explore solutions. We have to be a safe place for our families, safe place for our students, and a safe place for our staff.
Well, I love that acronym. I just wrote it down. So I'm going to give you credit when I use it.
Yes.
Quintin, how about you? You want to finish this off? We're almost out of time, but you want to finish this off on some things you're working on?
Absolutely. We are working diligently.
You're still muted. Oh, there you go. You're good now.
We're working diligently on expanding delivery of services for the adult learner, looking at the delivery in a different format. Instead of doing the traditional 15 weeks, looking at 8 weeks. And what this provides is the ability to still be a full-time student, but you're able to complete 2 classes at a time, be focused on those instructions, have access to the necessary services, successfully complete them, and then transition to the next 2 courses within the same 15 weeks, and you will finish 12 credits or more, but have the ability to be more focused on it. So it's a change in how we've always done it, but it's one way that I think we will get to. So, thank you.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Great things happening at Allegheny County Community College. Well, that brings us to the end of our time together.